to make VR survive, we actually need to make fewer VR games and make more games VR. We're going to be talking about VR, Skyrim, HTC Vive, and a whole lot more, but first, coffee. Is it just me or is it getting bright in here? Okay, alright, I can't remember exactly where this coffee is from, but it's called Lagoa, and it is probably some kind of Brazilian type coffee. So one of the most important titles for VR that we've been waiting a long time for has been Skyrim VR. It is the game that, although I know that Fallout VR came out first, the one I was personally waiting for the most was Skyrim VR, and that's because it's the slightly more fantasy-esque game, and because I'm such a fan of things like Sword Art Online, being able to go into a place where there's just fantasy landscapes, sword fighting and all that sort of thing really excited me. But the main question I want to ask today is whether we need more VR games or just more games like Skyrim, which are just games that already existed, which are being made into VR games. And I have a theory that we don't actually need to make more VR games. We actually just need to make more games VR, as in to create VR versions of games that we already have. But before we talk about that, I've played a number of games that, well, for example, even just last week I made a video about that Hatsune Miku VR game. The company had seen Audio Shield and thought, hey, let's see if we can get someone to make a game like Audio Shield, and we'll have Hatsune Miku in the middle, and it just didn't really do it for me. I think there's like some free VR golf. Honestly, VR golf was no fun at all. I'm sure that VR golf will be fun in the future. What I discovered from playing Skyrim VR is that even though this game is not built, I'm pretty sure they weren't thinking about VR at all when they first built that game. There is nothing about it that doesn't work in VR. Obviously, it is not a game where you can actually walk up to a character and push them over. Well, maybe you actually maybe you can, but you can't like walk over to their hand, shake their hand. You can't, scratch them on the head. It's obviously not a 100% full VR fantasy world. It is Skyrim, the game, and you can now play it in VR. And the way I see it is that now I have a VR experience that, if I wanted to, I could spend an hour a day for over a year playing this, as opposed to what we have on the rest of the Steam VR store, which is a number of basically glorified demos, games that demonstrate a concept, but they won't put more money into making the full-on game, unless there's proof that there's enough people buying Vive that if they sell only this VR title, they can make enough money to recoup the costs of the research and development that goes into creating a VR title. Is the water ready? Yeah. So here's the situation with VR, and it's a bit of an issue because it's very exciting to have games playing in VR, and we're always very happy when games come out in VR, but at the same time, we know that there's not enough people who actually own it. And so if you're a company making a game in VR, you can be sure that if you spend a lot of money on it, you're not going to make a huge return on your investment just because there are not enough VR headsets out there. Yes, I know that it was popular on PlayStation VR. I know that the Vive and the Oculus are doing quite well, but when you compare it to the sales of just regular console titles or regular PC game titles that you just play on a monitor, it's going to be nowhere near the same numbers, just because it takes a much more expensive computer and a much more powerful system to run VR. A lot of the headsets that are out there are still quite expensive. I know that PlayStation VR has definitely come down in price, but it is still more expensive than simply owning a PC or simply owning a console. And so here's the issue. You could put a lot of money into a VR title, and maybe you'll make some of your money back, but there's that risk that if you spend as much as that you would have spent to build a huge game like Skyrim, then what if it doesn't pan out? It would be so expensive, and then you would have to maybe just convert it to make it a 2D only game or something. Just like, I guess, what's happening with the 3DS. It's like, we're going to put all this effort into making lots of 3D visuals, but in the end, one of the most popular 3DS consoles is actually the 2DS, the one that actually plays games in 2D, even though they put all this extra effort into making 3D. And what I've discovered from playing Skyrim VR, a game that was not designed originally for VR and having so much fun. Honestly, looking around and thinking it's almost like this was designed to be for VR from the start really got me thinking about the fact that maybe games don't have to be VR games. And in fact, what I would much prefer would be to use the very simple basics of VR, which are teleporting, motion controls for the, for like a bow and arrow, for the sword, being able to look around in 360 with your head movement, all of those foundation elements. As long as you could make some sort of plugin that allows you to retrofit almost any game. Obviously, none of the games, if the game doesn't have 360 backgrounds and there's only like a diorama type background, you're going to be in trouble. But if you've got a game that actually has full 3D environments, if you could build some sort of plugin, and maybe there already is one, that could just convert lots of old games into VR, I would happily pay extra. I would even pay like an HTC subscription if you let me just use this plugin to enjoy a lot of games that weren't actually designed for VR as a sort of just plus alpha. And in a way, I think that VR doesn't have to survive as special VR titles, but in fact, just turning old games into VR could be the place for VR. That could be the place where it settles and finds its reason to be. Balance it on here. I love doing videos in the morning now because then I can do, like, the coffee is kind of such a warm aroma in the morning. Like, oh. The first sip never really works for me. I need the second sip. It's very earthy. I feel like I can taste the dirt. I really don't know how to describe this one apart from the fact that it's very earthy. It's like I can taste all the minerals and soils, but none of the like fruitiness that you might get in other coffees or accents and notes and stuff. It's really just a very down-to-earth coffee. Lagoa. So that's what I discovered while playing Skyrim VR. Honestly, the experience was ridiculous because that game was not designed for VR, but I went in and the first thing that I noticed that I really actually didn't quite like was the fact that you're on a moving cart. Now, your first experience with VR, ideally, I would not like it to be on a machine that is moving that you can't just stop if you want to stop. And it's because something about like your semicircular canals, you're not used to experiencing motion if you're not actually accelerating, decelerating, and moving. And so being on a cart that was moving, I was like, this is not where I want to be. So I was very tempted to just like hide and stuff. But I feel like recently, now that my VR headset has started to work a bit more, I'm kind of getting used to it. So this time I tried looking around and seeing the environment, but still I didn't feel super great about being on a moving object. But once you get off that moving object and you go over and you talk to those people who are about to behead you, basically, it's actually like, okay, finally, we're in VR. What's really great about VR so far is the sound design. Like, the sound that, these are all sounds that were just built into the game before, but maybe they've spatialized it a little more three-dimensionally, but you hear the sound coming from either behind you or above you or somewhere far away with an echo, and you look around, you're like, there is a dragon here somewhere, but I can't see it, because like you're in VR, you're looking around and you can't find the sound, and that's what gives you that fear. Not fear like jump scare, Five Nights at Freddy's fear. I'm just talking about like that it makes you feel unsettled. Then there's like the beheading, you're looking up like you just saw a person get beheaded, and you can actually turn your head and look up at the guy who does the beheading, the executioner, and that's kind of terrifying. But then suddenly the dragon arrives, and oh my goodness, it's like so close, and you're fearing for your life because you know that because it's VR, you can't just run away. You've got room scale VR, so you could actually stand up if you wanted, but you've already been set at this low level. You can't just run away, and then everyone starts to panic, and there's people telling you to run places. You follow him, you go up this thing, and then all of a sudden, a dinosaur head pops into the building, so it like breaks down the bricks, and you're faced with this dragon in your face. It's something that you never imagined would ever happen in your whole life, and yet it is right there in your face. And there are no YouTube videos that can ever really give you that feeling. Because it is the sound design, it is the visual cues, it is the environment, it is the fact that you have agency and control over your own limbs. Everything comes together to be a package that you cannot watch, you need to experience it. Even if you watch this video and you watch video clips of Skyrim VR, it will not give you even 1% of what it actually feels like to be in that world. And then have fire being breathed in your face, or worse, like a a dragon head just lunging out towards you and just snapping at you. I was terrified. And all of this from a game that was not designed to be VR from the start. This was just designed to be a game that, you know, clearly they had vision when they made the original game. Who'd have thought that putting it straight into VR with some plugins like, okay, you teleport, okay, now you've got motion weapons, like these are important mods that they must have worked very hard on, but essentially the game is still just Skyrim, but now in VR, and it works. I think my opinion is that I'm not that excited about concept VR games. I don't really care about the fact that VR is going to expand the way that we can play new types of games, like there could be new VR platforming titles, or, you know, games that really screw with your mind because you don't know if you're in the real world or the VR world or the dream world, or maybe you're 4 levels down, no one's ever gone down that deep, you know. Those titles will, of course, be really exciting, but I don't think that's what's going to set VR on fire. I think titles like Skyrim, sorry, I keep pointing down to my left because that's where I'm holding this headset. It's titles like Skyrim that are really going to set VR on fire. I think it's going to raise sales immensely for headsets, for the Windows Mixed Reality headsets, for the PlayStation VR headsets, Oculus Rift, for HTC Vive. You got so many options, so many, and I love how Steam has done it so flexibly. You can play it sitting down, or you can play it room scale. What's really great and what's going to take VR forward is giving people choice, letting them play in 2D when they feel like it. Then if they have the time and space, and there's, you know, people aren't going to get knocked over in the process, you can switch into VR mode and you can play it in VR mode. They did it with the 3DS. You could play it in 2D if you wanted to. There's a slider, you could play it in 3D. There were no like digital menus where you had to go into like menu, options, settings, 3D settings, and then turn on 3D. There was a slider, you turned it on, you turned it off. You could turn it up halfway, and that's what I think is going to really work for VR. Just stick with making games, and don't worry about making VR games. I just don't think it has that momentum yet. I think you'd be better off just making loads of games with a vision to having it also be playable in VR. If we think of VR as a plus alpha, just a thing that people who have headsets can just enjoy it in a new way, a more immersive way for the people who have the time. But even if I have a Vive headset, I would like the ability to just play my games not in VR. And for the games that are VR games, obviously that won't be possible because the point is to play them in VR. But I really do see the future as just really excellent, fun titles, playable in VR if you want to, playable not in VR if you don't want to play in VR, and that's going to massively build up the library of titles that we have access to. It's going to make people want to buy VR headsets even more, because right now it's like, if those concept titles, the ones that are kind of like, okay, you're in the dream world and it's working because you're in VR and we're going to use the motion controls like this, the games that are designed only for VR are currently going to stay quite niche. I think we'd be better off doing lots more of these game conversions, making all sorts of titles. Like, imagine if you could just go into Final Fantasy VII. And, you know, I know that those were diorama backgrounds, but imagine if they had made 3D backgrounds, like, I think FF10 was fully 3D, you know, FF12, FF15, all of these games that already have 3D environments fully fleshed out. You could go in VR, and actually I know that FF15 already has like a VR mode, but you know what I mean. Take what we already have as enjoyable experiences and add VR as a plus alpha, and you will see VR massively take off. And then It'll be so much easier to take risks with your concept games, with the crazy, VR only games, because then a huge number of people will already own the headsets. I don't think they're going to buy them for the concept title. They're going to buy VR so they can play Skyrim in VR. And then they'll buy these $10 VR demos, and it won't feel so bad. It won't be like I bought like a $600 headset and a $1,000 PC just so that I could play VR demos. What you want is to play these full 100-hour RPG experiences, and then I don't feel so bad about paying $10, even $25 for that Miku game. But if I knew that sort of game, like the Miku VR game, if that was the only sort of title that was available, like these concept titles which are not really as fun as Project Diva in my opinion, then it wouldn't have been enough. Don't make VR games, make games VR. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Oh, perfect timing, and now I can go to work. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little chat about VR gaming. Honestly, now that I've played Skyrim VR, it has really opened my eyes to the potential of this platform, not just as a new genre of games, but just as a new way to enjoy what we have already been working so hard on for 10 to 15, 25 years of just making games, just adding VR as an element to genres and titles that we have already had. I think it's going to massively help VR take off, and at that point, then we can start to be even more creative. I was about to start talking about it all over again, but I really need to just finish this coffee and go to work. I hope you enjoyed this NihongoGamer video. Please do subscribe if you want to hear more stuff like this. Do let me know what you would like to hear chats about. Obviously, this coffee sessions thing, like I'm up for talking about pretty much anything. So if there's anything that you want me to talk about, do put it in the comments and I'll have a look down there for new themes for coffee videos in the future. And then obviously give the video a like as well. That will definitely help with the analytics and the algorithms and all that. And then I'll see you in the next NihongoGamer video.